Obese's daughter was given to a slave as punishment by her father, but he loved her like no one ever. That was the tale, told in hushed voices by the fireside, a tale the wind seemed to carry across the plains, where dust rose with the horses' hooves and shadows grew long on the hills. Folks swore it was true, though truth in old stories often grows taller than the grass in spring. Still, at its heart lay a girl, a father, and a love so strange it turned shame into honor. The father was Lord Hammond. His name carried weight like a hammer striking an anvil. Men bowed low when he passed, not out of affection, but out of fear and respect. His land stretched far, fields of golden wheat, stables echoing with the restless stomp of proud stallions, barns filled to the rafters. His house stood higher than any other, built with heavy stone that spoke of power and permanence. And Lord Hammond himself carried a presence so sharp that even silence bent around him. Yet for all his silver, his grain, and his proud lineage, Lord Hammond was known for one thing above all: pride. Pride that swelled his chest, pride that stiffened his jaw, pride that left little room for gentleness. To him, strength meant control, and control meant fear. He ruled his home as he ruled his land, with iron will and an unyielding hand. In that great house lived his only child, a daughter named Miriam. She was not like the delicate girls who moved through the village with laughter on their lips and slender arms filled with flowers. Miriam's frame was large, heavy, and broad, her steps pressing firmly into the earth. Her body marked her apart, and where she longed for love, she found only stares, whispers, and the cutting silence of a father ashamed of her. At the long table where Hammond feasted with guests, Miriam sat small in spirit, though not in form. His words to her were never tender. They struck like stones. "You eat too much. You disgrace me when others look upon you. Why can you not be like the daughters of other men?" Each word built walls around her heart, shutting her away from the light she craved. In the stillness of her chamber, Miriam wept where no one could see. She pressed her face into her hands, longing for just one smile from her father that was not laced with scorn. The servants watched her quietly, pity in their eyes, but none dared to cross the will of Lord Hammond. To them, she was the daughter of a great man, yet one who carried herself as though she were already broken. When Miriam walked to the village well, pitcher balanced in her strong hands, the people saw her. They whispered. Some mocked. Others felt pity, seeing the weight she bore was not only of her body, but of her father's pride. Her eyes were always lowered, her voice always soft, as though speaking too loudly might invite the sharp sting of another wound. But though sorrow clung to her like a shadow, fate had not finished its weaving. For in the loom of destiny, even threads of pain are pulled tight to form patterns unseen. Lord Hammond's pride, in time, would lead him to an act so cruel it would shake the walls of his own house. He would seek to punish his daughter, to cast her aside as though she were nothing but a burden. Yet in that act lay the seed of change, a seed that would grow into a love deeper than Hammond could ever have imagined. Stories such as this do not begin with laughter or feasting. They begin in silence, in pain, in the deep yearning of a heart left empty too long. And so begins the tale of Miriam, the daughter of wealth, the daughter of sorrow, the daughter who would one day learn that the hand meant to break her would instead bring her the love that would make her whole. It was said in those days that pride is a fire that burns not only the man who holds it, but all who stand close enough to feel its heat. Lord Hammond was a man lit through with that fire, and his daughter Miriam had lived long years in its smoke. But fires, when stoked too high, often spill from the hearth, scorching more than intended. And so it was with Hammond. For one evening his pride and anger joined hands and set the course of his daughter's life upon a path no one expected. The day had started like any other. The sun hung heavy over the fields, and the smell of grain and dust drifted through the air. In the great house, preparations were underway for a feast. Hammond had called upon men of standing, merchants, landowners, and neighboring lords, to sit at his table, eat his bread, drink his wine, and speak his name with respect when they returned home. He longed to display his wealth, his horses, his barns, and, above all, his daughter. For though he often spoke scorn of her, Miriam was still his blood, and he wished to show her off as though she were a jewel upon his crown. But Miriam, weary from years of humiliation, heavy from the weight of every word he had pressed upon her, refused to go. She sat in her chamber, her heart pounding, her hands clenched in her lap. "I will not be mocked tonight," she whispered to herself, though no one heard. For she knew what awaited her. The stares, the laughter behind covered mouths, the proud boasting of her father, followed by his cold eyes once they were alone. When Haman came to her and found her unwilling, his face darkened like a sky heavy with storm. His voice thundered down the halls. "You dare defy me? You dare bring shame upon my name before men of honor." Miriam trembled, but did not move. "Father," she said, her voice barely above a breath, "I cannot go. Not tonight." But pride, once stirred, is a beast not easily tamed. Haman's fury burned hotter with every moment. He would not be made a fool by his daughter, not before men whose words could spread wider than the wind. And in that rage, he spoke the judgment that would alter both her life and his own. "You are no daughter of mine this night," he declared, his hand raised as though casting her down. "If you will not walk among lords, then you shall walk among slaves. From this day forth, you will belong to Eliab, the servant who works my fields. Let him take you, let him feed you, let him bear the shame I can no longer carry." The words struck Miriam like blows. Her knees weakened, her breath caught in her chest. To be cast away from her father's house was one thing, but to be given to a slave? It was the deepest wound his pride could deliver. Servants gasped, covering their mouths. Guests at the feast would later whisper of it for years, saying they had never seen such cruelty dressed as punishment. That night, as the lamps burned low in Haman's house, Miriam gathered what little was given to her and followed Eliab down the path to the small hut by the river. Her tears fell silent on the ground, leaving dark marks in the dust behind her. She thought herself cursed, abandoned, unwanted. And yet, the river did not mock her. The stars above did not scorn her. The earth beneath her feet did not judge her size or her sorrow. Only her father's pride had done that. And though she did not yet know it, the very punishment meant to break her would become the soil where hope would take root. The people of the village shook their heads when they heard. "The Lord has cast away his own flesh," they murmured. "No good can come of it." But stories have a way of bending where no one expects. And in the quiet of that humble hut by the river, Miriam's life was about to change forever. The road from Lord Haman's stone house to the river hut was not long in distance. But for Miriam it felt endless, each step heavy with the weight of shame. Her father's words echoed in her ears, harsh as a whip. "You are no daughter of mine this night." That sentence clung to her spirit like burrs in a horse's tail, sharp, digging deep, refusing to let go. She walked in silence beside Eliab, the man her father had called a slave. Eliab had worked Haman's field since boyhood. His skin was darkened by the sun, his hands hardened by soil and plow. Folks often overlooked him, for he was quiet and kept to his work, moving like a shadow across the land. Few spoke to him except to give orders, and fewer still thought of him as anything more than another tool in the Lord's keeping. When Haman's decree fell, Eliab had bowed his head, but inside his heart stirred. He had not asked for this burden, nor for the weight of a daughter scorned. Yet he did not grumble, nor did he sneer. He simply took up the path that was placed before him, steady as the river he lived beside. As they reached the hut, Miriam expected little. She thought she would be tossed aside, made to sleep on the bare floor, treated with the same disdain her father had shown. Her heart braced itself for more cruelty. But when Eliab pushed open the wooden door, he stepped aside and said softly, "Come in. This roof is yours now as much as it is mine." The hut was small, built of wood and clay, its roof patched with reeds. There was but a single bed, a table rough-hewn from oak, and a hearth where a faint fire still glowed. It was nothing like the grand chambers she had left behind. Yet there was something about the place, something simple, something honest, that the stone walls of her father's house had never given her. Eliab moved quietly about, stirring the fire until its light filled the room. He took bread from a small basket and set on the table, along with a jug of water. "Eat," he said, his voice steady, not commanding, not mocking, just steady like the river. Miriam looked at him, puzzled. No one had ever spoken to her without judgment, without measuring her worth against her body. "We're not angry?" she asked, her voice trembling. Eliab met her eyes, his gaze calm. "Angry? Why should I be? You are not a punishment to me, Miriam. You are flesh and blood, as I am. The Lord may see shame in you, but I do not. To me, you are a gift I will honor." Those words struck her deeper than any of her father's insults. For a moment she could not breathe, not from pain, but from wonder. A gift? She had been called burden, disgrace, shame, but never gift. That night, as Miriam lay upon the bed and Eliab sat quietly by the fire, she felt something stir in her chest that she had thought long dead. It was small, fragile as a sprout breaking through dry soil, but it was there, a flicker of safety, a spark of dignity. Outside, the river flowed, its voice steady in the night. And within that humble hut, for the first time in many years, Miriam felt the faint warmth of hope pressing against her sorrow. The days that followed were quiet, but not empty. Miriam woke to the sound of the river's song instead of her father's harsh words. She rose not to the clatter of servants and the cold stare of wealth, but to the steady rhythm of Eliab tending the hearth or stepping out into the fields with the first light of dawn. Life in the hut was simple: bread, water, fire, and earth. Yet in that simplicity, Miriam began to breathe again. At first, she kept to herself. Years of being mocked had built walls around her heart so thick that even kindness could not easily pass through. When Eliab spoke gently, she answered only in short words. When he offered her food, she hesitated, afraid he too would scorn her for taking more than her share. But Eliab never mocked, never judged. His silence was not cold, but patient. He gave her space, as one gives the earth time to heal after a harsh season. One morning, Eliab asked her to walk with him by the river. Miriam shook her head at first, and used to such invitations. But his eyes were steady, and something in his tone made it hard to refuse. Together they walked along the bank, the water glinting in the sun, the reeds swaying gently in the breeze. "You see how the river moves?" Eliab said, pointing to the current. "It does not rush because others demand it. It does not hide its strength. It moves as it was made to move, steady, strong, unashamed." Miriam followed the line of the river with her eyes. "I have never thought of it that way," she whispered. He glanced at her. "You are much like that river, Miriam. You are strong, steady. Others may mock what they do not understand, but their words do not change the truth." No one had ever spoken to her like that before. Tears filled her eyes, though she quickly turned away so he would not see. But Eliab did see, and he said nothing, letting her tears fall in peace. In time, Miriam began to laugh again, softly at first, like the timid notes of a bird at dawn. The first time Eliab heard it, his face lit up with joy. He did not laugh at her, but with her, and the sound filled the hut with a warmth no fire had ever given. They worked side by side. She helped him grind grain. He showed her how to mend nets by the water, and together they shared meals not out of duty, but out of companionship. Miriam's heart, once bound in chains of shame, began to loosen. The wall she had built to protect herself slowly crumbled, replaced by something gentler: trust. And out of that trust, love began to grow. It was not sudden, like lightning flashing in the sky. It was slow, like the steady blooming of wildflowers after a long winter. She saw it in the way Eliab never turned away from her, in the way he treated her as equal, in the way he spoke to her with respect, even when no one else was there to hear. One evening, as the sun set and painted the sky with fire, Miriam looked at Eliab and realized her heart no longer carried the same weight it once did. Pain still lived there, yes, but it no longer ruled her. In its place was something new, hope, tender and fragile. yet stronger than the chains her father had tried to bind her with. And Eliab, who had been given her as a punishment, looked at her as though she were treasure. He saw in her not shame, but beauty, not burden, but blessing. Thus, in a hut by the river, where the world thought only sorrow would dwell, love quietly took root. It grew in silence, watered by kindness, warmed by patience, and guarded by respect. It was a love born not in wealth, nor in pride, but in compassion, a love stronger than pain, stronger even than the cruelty that had once cast her aside. Now, time has a way of softening even the hardest edges, though not all at once. Weeks rolled into months, and the little cabin of Elias and Ruth began to hold more than just the quiet scratching of chores and the crackle of firewood. There was laughter, low, unsteady at first, like a cold trying its legs for the first time, but it grew stronger with each passing day. And while the people of Willow Creek still looked on with their sharp eyes and sharper tongues, something was shifting in the silence between those two souls. Elias, though once branded by iron and burden, carried a gentleness that could not be stolen. He tended the land with his hands, steady and sure, and tended Ruth's heart in much the same way, slowly, patiently, never rushing her to bloom. He knew she carried scars deeper than her body bore, wounds left not by whip or chain, but by her father's cruel dismissal. The girl had been cast away as if she were no more than unwanted grain husk, and such a wound cut into the bone of a person's worth. Ruth, for her part, found herself watching Elias when she thought he would not notice. The way he rose before dawn, his shoulders bent beneath the yoke of work, not once complaining, not once seeking pity. She watched him bow his head before each meal, whispering words she could barely catch, words of thanks for the food for the day for her. It was the first time in her life that someone had counted her a blessing, and she could not fathom why. But kindness, like water seeping into dry earth, began to sink into her spirit. She started to rise earlier, to knead the bread with care, to sweep the floor with pride. Though her body was heavy, her hands became lighter in their work, her heart less burdened. Elias never once spoke of her weight, never once mocked or sighed. He looked at her as though she were simply Ruth, and that was enough. Still, shadows lingered. Nights would fall, and Ruth would sometimes dream of her father's house, of the stern eyes that had dismissed her as if she were a punishment to be rid of. She would wake in tears, ashamed of her softness, ashamed of the way her dress strained at its seams. Yet, in those nights, Elias would speak not of shame, but of hope. "You are not cast aside here," he told her once, his voice deep and firm as oak. "You are chosen, by God above and by me." That simple truth struck her harder than any blow she had ever received. To be chosen, after a lifetime of rejection, there was power in that. In the town, whispers grew louder. Some said Elias had bewitched the girl with strange charms, that no man could truly love such a burden. Others claimed Ruth was softening the slave's back with easy living, making him forget the yoke he once bore. But the truth lay in the silence of the cabin, where love was not measured in outward beauty nor weighed upon a scale. It was measured in the way Elias saved the first ripe fruit for Ruth, and in the way Ruth mended Elias's worn coat by candlelight. One evening, as the sun burned low and gold over the plains, Elias took Ruth's hand and placed it over his heart. "This is yours," he said simply. No grand speeches, no polished words, just truth, plain and unshaken. Ruth wept then, not from sorrow, but from a joy she had never known. For the first time in her life, she began to believe she was worthy of love. And so the days stretched, carrying them forward like a slow river carving its course through stone. Their story was no fairy tale, no sudden transformation wrought overnight. It was a tale of kindness breaking chains stronger than iron, of patience teaching a wounded heart to beat freely again. For what is love, if not the steady choosing of one another, day after day, despite the whispers of the world? Word has a way of traveling faster than the wind across the prairie, and though John Fletcher, Ruth's father, kept himself busy with land and cattle, The whispers of Willow Creek could not be shut out. He heard them at the trading post, in the churchyard, even from passing riders who thought little of letting loose their tongues. They spoke of his daughter, the daughter he had cast aside like a burden, and of the slave he had given her to, thinking it punishment. At first, John dismissed the talk with a wave of his hand. Let them chatter, he'd say. What good could come from pairing a spoiled, obese girl with a man shackled by his past? Yet each retelling gnawed at him, like a wolf worrying at a bone. Folks claimed Ruth was thriving, claimed she had taken to the little cabin as though she'd been born to it, claimed Elias treated her with a gentleness and devotion that made other wives in town look twice at their husbands. John found himself restless, pacing his wide, empty house at night. He thought of Ruth's mother, long gone to her grave, and of the promise he'd made to raise their daughter well. Had he not failed? He had seen her size as shame, her softness as weakness. Instead of protection, he had offered scorn. Instead of guidance, he had dealt punishment. And now a man he considered beneath him had given her what he himself could not. The weight of it pressed heavy on his chest. Pride had built his name in Willow Creek, but pride, too, left his home barren of laughter, barren of love. He remembered Ruth as a child, her hands sticky from berry picking, her laugh tumbling like bells across the yard. Somewhere along the way, he had stopped hearing that laugh. Somewhere, he had hardened his heart. And so, one dusky evening, with the sky aflame in streaks of orange and violet, John saddled his horse and rode the long trail toward Elias's cabin. The land stretched quiet around him, but his mind was anything but still. Questions gnawed at him. Would Ruth despise him? Would Elias shut the door in his face? He could not say, but something stronger than pride drove him onward, something nearer to regret, nearer to love long buried. When he reached the cabin, he found it plain but sturdy, smoke curling from its chimney, the scent of bread faint on the breeze. Through the window, he saw Ruth, her figure bent over the table, hands busy with stitching. Beside her, Elias moved with steady ease, setting wood by the fire. There was no grandeur to the scene, no splendor of wealth or finery, but there was peace. And in that peace, John felt the sharp pang of loss. Ruth looked up then, catching sight of him through the glass. For a moment, her eyes widened, old hurt flickering across her face. Elias placed a hand on her shoulder, steadying her, before turning to open the door. "Evening," Elias said, voice calm as ever. John dismounted slowly, feeling the weight of his years press heavy upon him. "Evening," he replied, though his throat was dry. His gaze drifted to Ruth. She stood now, not hiding, not shrinking, but steady as a rooted tree. "Ruth," he began, his voice rough, I've come to see the daughter I wronged." The words tasted like dust on his tongue, yet there they were, plain and unvarnished. Silence followed, broken only by the soft crackle of the fire within. Ruth's hands tightened on the fabric she held, but she did not look away. Elias's eyes moved from father to daughter, then back again. "The choice is hers," he said quietly, stepping aside. And so John stood there, a man stripped of pride, waiting not as master nor father, but as a beggar at the door of forgiveness. John Fletcher had always been a man of iron, or so he thought. His voice carried in the town like a whip crack, and men measured their words in his presence. He prided himself on land well kept, cattle well bred, and rules well enforced. Yet in the still hours of night, when no one watched, he sat in silence that rattled louder than any storm. That silence carried his wife's absence, his daughter's laughter now lost, and the echo of choices made in hardness rather than love. It was pride that had built him, but it was also pride that hollowed his house. Ruth's absence left it barren, the rooms echoing with emptiness no fire could warm. He told himself again and again that he had done right by her. Discipline makes strength, sternness makes obedience, but deep within, he knew the truth. He had looked at his daughter and seen shame where there was only innocence, weakness where there was simply difference. He had not punished her to teach. He had punished her to rid himself of the sight of what he could not understand. The talk in town would not leave him. It clung to him at the storehouse, at church, at the water trough, every place his shadow fell. Folks whispered of Ruth walking with her head higher than before, her face lighter, her heart steadier. They said Elias, the very man John had treated as less than soil, showed her more honor than her own bloodkin. It gnawed at John's heart, a truth he tried to spit out but could not. So it was that one late evening, with the horizon painted in copper and violet, John saddled his horse. The leather creaked under his weight, the beast shifting as if it too felt the weight of the journey. He had no fine words planned, no excuses rehearsed, for none seemed strong enough to hold the cracks in his chest. He only knew he had to see her. The trail stretched before him, dust rising beneath the hooves, coyotes calling from the far hills. With each mile, he felt himself stripped of the armor he had worn so long. He remembered Ruth as a child, chubby hands tugging at his coat, asking for stories at night. He remembered brushing her aside, too weary, too proud, too cold. He remembered the way her eyes had dimmed over the years, until all that shone was fear of his gaze. The closer he came to Elias's cabin, the sharper those memories cut. Regret is a strange thing. It rides with a man, silent, until the day he can no longer outrun it. That night, John Fletcher rode not as master, nor as landowner, nor even as father. He rode as a man undone. At last, the cabin came into view, small and plain against the sweep of the land. Smoke curled from the chimney, steady and straight. Through the window's glow, John caught sight of them. Ruth bent over her sewing, Elias stacking wood by the fire. It was no grand home, yet it pulsed with something John's own wide house had long been without: peace. He sat frozen in the saddle, watching. His hands gripped the reins tight. His jaw worked, but no words came. In that stillness, he saw it plain. The very thing he had cast aside was thriving without him. He had sent her away to break her, and instead she had found her mending. At last, Ruth's eyes lifted to the window, meeting his through the glass. She froze. Her needle stilled. For a moment, the air between them was thick with years of silence and pain. Elias's gaze followed hers, and without a word, he laid a hand on her shoulder. Then he walked to the door. The door opened, its creak cutting the quiet. Elias stepped out, tall and steady in the doorway. "Evening," he said, his voice even, neither hostile nor warm, just calm, like a man waiting for the truth to declare itself. John slid from his horse, his boots sinking into the dirt, the weight of his years dragging heavy. He nodded once. "Evening." His eyes shifted past Elias, to where Ruth stood, framed in lamplight. She was no longer the timid girl who had flinched at his glance. She was a woman steady in her place, her chin lifted, her hand clutching her sewing like a banner of her own worth. His throat tightened. For the first time in many years, his words did not come easy. He tried once, failed, then tried again. "Ruth," he rasped, his voice cracked like dry earth, I've come to see the daughter I wronged." The words, bare and heavy, hung in the air. Ruth's fingers tightened on her fabric, her breath sharp. Her eyes glistened, not with easy forgiveness, but with all the hurt he had sown into her years. She did not speak yet, and John did not expect her to. Some wounds take more than a single word to heal. Elias's eyes moved between them, quiet, weighing the moment. Then he stepped aside from the doorway. "The choice is hers," he said simply. And so John Fletcher, once the proudest man in Willow Creek, stood not as master, not even as father, but as a beggar at the threshold of grace, waiting for an answer that was no longer his to command. The air that night held a weight heavier than any storm. John Fletcher stood at the doorway, his shadow long across the earth, while inside the glow of lamplight wrapped Ruth and Elias in a circle of warmth he had never known how to give. For a heartbeat, no one moved. It was as though time itself held its breath, waiting to see if forgiveness could spring up from soil so dry. Ruth's heart pounded in her chest. She remembered every cutting word her father had ever spoken, every look of disappointment that carved her down smaller than she already felt. She remembered the day he sent her away, his hand waving her off as if she were nothing more than shame in his household. That wound had followed her into sleep and into waking. And now, here he was, stripped of his pride, standing not as a master of land and cattle, but as a man broken by his own choices. Elias stepped back, silent, his presence steady as the earth beneath their feet. He would not speak Ruth's choice for her. He had given her love, yes, but more than that, he had given her voice. And so he stood, his dark eyes fixed on her, telling her without words that she was free to speak her truth. John cleared his throat, his voice rough like gravel under boot. "I cannot change what I did," he said, the words trembling though he fought to steady them. "I cannot take back the scorn I laid on you, nor the coldness I called discipline. I see now I cast away what was most precious, and I would give all I have, Ruth, just to hear you call me father once more." Ruth's eyes filled, her needle and thread slipping forgotten from her hands. For a long time, she said nothing. The fire snapped in the hearth, filling the silence with its restless song. Then at last she spoke, her voice soft yet clear. "You gave me away like I was a punishment. You thought my weight was a curse, my presence a burden. I carried that shame like a stone tied to my back. But here," she turned her gaze to Elias, her lips trembling, "here I have learned I am more than what you saw. I am loved, and I am worth being loved." John bowed his head, the lines of age deep upon his face. Tears slipped down his cheeks. The kind of man cannot stop once they begin. Ruth drew a long, shaking breath. "I do not know if I can forget," but she swallowed, steadying herself. "I will not let hatred root itself in my heart. Mother would not want that. I forgive you, Father. But forgiveness does not mean I return to your house. My place is here with Elias." The words hung in the cabin, strong as iron, gentle as rain. John lifted his head, surprise and sorrow mingled in his eyes. Yet beneath it was something else, a release. For the first time in many years, he did not command, did not scold, did not own. He only nodded, as a man grateful for what he did not deserve. Elias stepped forward then, offering John a chair by the fire. It was not much, just wood and leather worn by time, but it was a gesture of peace. John sank into it, his shoulders sagging. For a time, father and daughter sat in the same room once more, the distance between them bridged not by words alone, but by the slow, steady work of grace. Outside, the night deepened, stars scattering like seeds across the sky. Inside, the firelight glowed upon three faces marked by sorrow, love, and forgiveness. And so it was that Ruth, once cast aside, found her strength. Elias, once bound in chains, proved the truest kind of freedom is in loving without condition. And John Fletcher, once blinded by pride, learned the hardest lesson of all, that a man is measured not by the land he owns nor the cattle he counts, but by the love he keeps and the love he gives. For in the end, forgiveness is not forgetting the pain. It is choosing to set it down, so love may carry what pride cannot. And so, folks, that's how it was. A girl once cast aside as shame became the living proof that love, steady and patient, can mend what the world has torn. A man once bound in chains showed that kindness weighs heavier than iron, and that true strength is found in gentleness. And a father, proud and blind, learned that forgiveness is the hardest road a man will ever ride, but the only road that leads him home. It ain't the prettiest story, nor the easiest, but life seldom gives us easy trails. What does give us is choice, the choice to hate or forgive, to wound or to heal, to turn away or to love anyway. Ruth chose forgiveness, Elias chose love, and John Fletcher chose to lay down his pride. Maybe that's the lesson for us all. Never give up on love, even when it comes in unexpected places. Believe in compassion, for it can turn punishment into blessing. And remember, no matter how far a heart has strayed, grace can always call it back.